Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be giving a little bit of a review on Saw X. I honestly debated for the longest time if I actually wanted to see this movie in theaters. I actually haven't seen any Saw movies in theaters, mostly because I was just a little tiny baby Jody when these movies started coming out and I started watching them. And I think it was only Saw 3D, Saw Final Chapter that had come out after I had turned 18, and when it came out and I turned 18, none of my friends were 18, so I had no one to go with. Even the two friends I had that were 18 were like, yeah, there's no way in heck I'm going to see a Saw movie. And I was like, ah, friends. And then Jigsaw came out, Spiral came out, and it's funny because I didn't see either of those in theaters, and then I didn't watch either of them until Spiral had almost come out on DVD. It was funny because I just fell off the Saw bandwagon, and then one day I just decided to watch Jigsaw, and I actually really liked Jigsaw, and then I convinced Sam to watch all of the Saw movies with me. So then we watched all the Saw movies together, and then him and I watched Spiral together actually for the very first time. So yeah, I had never seen any of the Saw movies in theaters, and I really wasn't sure if I wanted to because I'm quite squeamish, which is funny considering I like these movies. But I just was like, I don't know if I can handle it. So my brother-in-law convinced me. He was like, hey, we'll go to a late showing. We'll go on a day when it's basically almost out of theater. So hopefully the theater isn't too busy or anything and you don't feel embarrassed or you're kind of ruining someone else's experience by being squeamish or anything. I brought a blanket with me, which was 1 for warmth and 2 to cover my face, which I definitely did. All that being said, I am so glad that my brother-in-law convinced me and I saw this movie in theaters. Also, I'm just getting over a cold, so I'm sorry if I sound weird. I should have said that at the beginning of this video. I'm sorry if I sound weird. I'm getting over a cold, but I really wanted to get this video out. I meant to film this last week when I was in the height of my cold, and so I obviously didn't. I am so glad he talked me into going to see this movie in theaters because I freaking loved this movie. Oh my goodness. I watched a few reviews about this movie. I very much avoided spoilers. I very much avoided any talk about the traps or anything. I still wanted to know what people were thinking about it. It's just generally, is it good? Is it bad? But I didn't want to know anything about the traps or anything going into it. So I would watch reviews where people would be like, this movie is so good. Let's talk about the traps. And I'd exit out of them. But holy smokes, if you are a fan of Saw, this is a love letter to Saw. It is such a great movie. I know that sounds so corny, but it is. It is so good. And I'll just say right off the bat, if you don't like Saw, you're not gonna like this, and that's just all there is to it. And I would never pressure anyone who doesn't like Saw to watch this movie because it is brutal. A couple of the traps in this movie are brutal. Like I said, I was covering my face with my blanket, and yes, I love the Saw movies. I love them so much. I don't necessarily love the tortureness of them, which is kind of hilarious to say. I've literally had to explain this to every single person that I've ever told that I like the Saw movies, because they're like, Jody, you love Disney and Marvel and Star Wars. How do you love the Saw movies? I love the lore behind the Saw movies. A lot of people who don't watch the Saw movies think it's just now 10 movies that are different ways to kill people, and it's not that at all. There is so much more that goes on in these movies. There's so many twists and so many characters and so much that goes on behind the traps, and that's what I love about these movies. And another thing that I have always loved about these movies that this movie took and just shined upon is the character of John Kramer, performed by Tobin Bell. I have loved Tobin Bell as John Kramer since Saw 2. Obviously, he doesn't have a giant role in the first Saw, but I even loved him even more when I found out that in Saw 1, fun fact, Tobin Bell actually laid on the floor of the bathroom throughout the entire filming process. So spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Saw 1, the very ending of Saw 1, the dead body stands up and we realize it was John Kramer the whole time. It was Jigsaw the whole time, laying there pretending to be dead to like watch the game play out and like watch to make sure they were following the rules. An incredible twist of an ending in Saw 1. When I found out that the directors hired Tobin Bell to literally just stand up, and they told him, we're gonna get a fake body in to lay here throughout the entire filming process because it has to be dead and it just has to lay here. Tobin Bell was like, no, I'll lay there. And so he literally laid there covered in fake blood in like a t-shirt and boxers for days and days and days while they filmed the bathroom scene in Saw, which if you've seen Saw, you know that is the major scene of the movie, is the bathroom scene that plays out throughout the entire film. And so that just was like, okay, respect as an actor, the fact that you were the one to choose, that you yourself wanted to lay there, and literally all you do in the movie is at the very end you stand up and you leave the room, and you chose to still lay there, like, props. So obviously throughout the movies we see him as a bad guy. He's a serial killer. He's capturing people and putting them in these horrific traps to prove that they value their life. This movie made him the protagonist instead of the antagonist, and I just loved that because I've always loved John Kramer. I've always thought he was such a cool, complex character, and this movie just gave him so many more levels of him, and I just loved it. One thing that I absolutely loved about this movie was seeing his actual empathetic side. We see him put people in these absolutely horrific traps, and you think that, oh god, this man must have absolutely no empathy for these people. But what I loved about this movie is that we actually get to see him truly like honor his own game. So there's the like eyeball trap that we see, which ends up turning out to be just like his imagination. It doesn't actually happen, which I've heard some people complain about, which I was just kind of like, this movie's about John Kramer. We're inside the mind of John Kramer this entire movie. So I feel like it makes sense to see his like fantasies and see him like fantasizing a trap, whether or not he plays it out or not. So we see the eyeball trap, and then the next trap to happen is Diego, the cab driver, and we actually get to see that Diego survives the trap, and immediately as soon as he survives and he completes the trap, John Kramer immediately goes to his care with a first aid kit and helps to get him better. And I loved seeing that side of him because we don't often see that. Like, truly speaking, 9 times out of 10 people don't survive these traps. But there's actually 2 people who survived their traps in this film, and both times he instantly is like, they played by the rules, they survived, here's a first aid kit, let me help you, or call an ambulance and get an ambulance here to help them. For someone who is a serial killer, we actually get to see like the true sides of him that actually like truly honor his own game. So yes, he is a serial killer, and I know we shouldn't put props onto him for being a serial killer, but as this serial killer that, if you love the Saw franchise like I do, a serial killer that we've followed for 10 movies now, to see this side of him where he's actually like caring about the people in his traps and showing that he actually very much values his own rules, I just love that. Another complaint people have about the Saw franchise is throughout the movies we definitely see a few people who don't deserve to be in traps. This movie is different in the sense that everyone in their traps 1000% deserves to be in them. They are horrible people. They have done horrible things, and they very much deserve to be in this trap. Another thing, I was talking to Sam about this movie that I was saying I really, really liked. So it's not a spoiler. It straight up says it in the trailer for this movie. John Kramer goes to Mexico to have this experimental surgery done that he believes will remove the tumor from his brain and give him his life back. One thing I really liked about John Kramer, when he realized he was duped and he realized this surgery didn't actually even happen and they just completely and totally scammed him, not once did he ever bring up for himself there's another character that comes back that does bring up the money aspect of being scammed. But for John Kramer, not once does he ever acknowledge that he's mad at them for taking his money and scamming him out of money, which to a lot of people that would be a very big deal. He paid, I think it's like $250,000 for this procedure to be done, and he was scammed out of all of it. I think he mentions paying them once in the movie when he realizes he's been scammed. It's nothing about the money that is upsetting him. It is 100% about the fact that he values his life so much. They made him believe that he had a chance to survive and to get his life back. And there's even a moment where it feels like he is going to step away from like the jigsawness of his life until he realizes what they did, and then he's like, nope, I don't have much time left, and I'm going to fulfill what I was meant to fulfill, and I'm going to teach them. But I just loved that for him it was never about the money. For him it was 100% about his life and having his life back. And yeah, I really liked that for him money was never brought up into it. It was never like, you scammed me out of so much money. For him it was, no, you scammed me out of my life and living my life. I liked that it felt like a Saw movie, especially coming from the last movie, which was Spiral, which I don't like Spiral very much at all. This felt like a Saw movie with the editing and the cutting that they do, and obviously the incredible score. This felt like a Saw movie and I loved it. So I think now I'm going to get into some spoilers and talk about the traps and stuff in this movie. But one more thing just quickly before I send off anyone who doesn't want anything spoiled for them. I'll just say, throughout all of the Saw movies, I always compared Jigsaw to Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, where he is actually very little in the movies, but his presence is just like always felt, and we always feel like he's around and he's there, even though technically for screen time he's not actually there very much. Like, I'm pretty sure Saw 2 is probably where he gets the most screen time. But either way, I was saying to Sam that he has always felt like Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, where he's actually, when you break it down, he's actually very little in the movie, but we always feel like he's present. And one thing I loved about this movie is that, no, he's actually there pretty much the whole movie. Like, this movie is about John Kramer. This movie is about Jigsaw. It's not about all the cops and the detectives and the hunt to find him. It is about him. And I love that because, like I said at the beginning of this video, I just love Jigsaw. I love John Kramer. I think he's such an incredible fictional serial killer. So now I'm going to go into some spoilers, talk about the traps and stuff. So if you don't want to hear any spoilers, even though this movie has been out for a while, when we saw it, it literally had like 3 showings left because we saw it so late. But either way, if you don't want to hear about the traps, totally understandable. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next video. So as I mentioned before, there's the eyeball trap, which obviously is like just in his imagination. It doesn't actually happen in real life. I've heard people complain and say that they didn't like that it wasn't a real trap. I liked that opposed to what they did in Spiral. In Spiral, they talk about a trap. They say like this one character was in a trap, but then they don't show the trap. And for me, that was kind of a little bit of a slap in the face because it was like, oh, this guy obviously isn't dead. This is a Saw movie. Why would they not show a trap? I heard some people who like Spiral say that, oh, they probably didn't show it because it was too brutal. It's like, no, they didn't show it because it was a cop-out, and the person who was in the trap wasn't actually in the trap and they didn't actually die. And the moment they didn't show the trap, I called it and I knew, and I was like, that guy's still alive. Why would they not show the trap? And it's like, oh, it's too brutal. I'm like, what was the rack? The rack wasn't brutal? No, I don't believe you. So in comparison to those two things, I would much prefer what happened in Saw X than what happened in Spiral, in the sense that this trap didn't actually happen. But like I said, it made sense that it was just in his imagination because this movie is 100% going on in John's head. He is the main character of this movie. He's not just the side character like he's been in for all of the other movies. He's the main character. So when he sees someone doing something, and in his messed up brain that thinks of these things, he sees what this person is doing and he's like, ah, yeah, you're not a good person. How could I do something to you? And he thinks of it, and this is what he thinks. And I would much rather that than, oh, this guy was in a trap. We're not going to show you the trap. You're a Saw movie. Show me the trap. So there was that trap, which was cool. I actually had no idea what was going to happen. He kept talking about like sanitizing and stuff, so I kind of thought he was going to just like, the tubes were going to like pour sanitizer into this guy's face, into his eyes, and like disintegrate his eyes. I didn't know it was going to be a vacuum, so that was kind of cool. And then the next trap, we get that the character actually survives. That I mentioned that he immediately went to his care and his attention when he survived, is he's put bombs on his arms, and then he's basically completely duct taped over his hands, and the only thing there is scalpels, and he has to dig out through his muscles and stuff to get the bombs off, because the scalpels won't tear through the bomb, but they will tear through the muscles. So this guy actually does survive. Good job. And then the next trap we see is what people are saying is the most brutal trap, and that is the leg amputation trap. That part is brutal, and then what makes it even more brutal is that she has to get her bone marrow sucked out of her femur, and yeah. I'm assuming if you're watching this part, you've already seen the movie. You know what happens, but she does not survive the trap. And then the next trap is the brain surgery trap, which is reminiscent of John's brain surgery he has in Saw 3. And same thing, he does not survive the trap. And I was talking to Sam about it afterwards, because both of these two characters literally like just lost. She needed to fill up like a container of like, I don't know, 100 milliliters of her bone marrow from her femur into this cup to survive, and it was at like 98 when her time ran out, and then she... Same thing with the brain surgery trap. He had to cut a piece of his skull away and then literally just dig into his brain with some tweezers and pull something out and put it into a jar, which would dissolve the brain matter. And then once that solution was dissolved and there was enough, it would open up a thing to give him a key. And same thing, it was in the process of dissolving like this when the time ran out. And when I was talking to Sam about it, he was like, it seems so unfair that both of these characters had like just run out of time. Like, it's like, it doesn't seem fair. Like, why did the brain matter have to dissolve? Why did she have to get that much marrow? It doesn't seem fair. And I was like, yeah, but if you think about it, both of those characters spent a solid 60 seconds of their allotted like 3 to 4 minute traps. They spent a solid 60 seconds just freaking out, which, I mean, obviously you're going to do, like, cut off your leg and stick this thing in to get the marrow out of your femur and cut open your skull and give me a piece of your brain matter. Obviously they're going to spend a good majority of time freaking out, but it's like, but if they had started 5 seconds sooner, let alone when the time started, they would have survived. So I was like, yeah, but also no. Maybe that's just the unempathetic Saw girl in myself, thinking that they had lots of time. They should have been fine. They should have just started when the time started. The next trap, she had 2 cuffs. She had one on her wrist, one on the opposite ankle, and she was hung in the air, just basically exposed to like a bright light. I don't know necessarily if it was like radiation or what it was, or if it was just like a very, very bright light, but she was basically just getting burnt alive in front of this light. And so she was given a hammer and had to break her wrist, break her ankle to get herself out of the trap. And like I said earlier, a second character does survive their trap, and that was this character. She did get out and survive her trap. So she's on the floor, she's all burnt up, and as soon as she actually survived, John Kramer immediately says to Amanda, who I also have not mentioned that Amanda is in this movie. I haven't brought that up, but Amanda's in this movie, which is amazing. He says to Amanda, call an ambulance. Again, that just goes back to what I said earlier, that I loved seeing this side of John that actually like really cares about his rules and sticks to his rules, in the sense that it's like, oh, you finished, you get to live, and let me get you the help you need to get your ankle and your wrist fixed and get you possibly some skin grafts if they're required. Let me get you that help because you did what you needed to survive. The like twist of this movie is that there's a character that comes in who we believe is there to get back his money, because we believe he was also scammed by this doctor, so he is there to get back his money. But the twist is that he's actually working with the doctor, and she called him to try to get his help. But because John Kramer is 10 steps ahead of everyone, he obviously already figured this out. It was kind of interesting to see John get put into one of his own traps. I 1000% did not see that coming. Not in a million years did I think John Kramer would ever be put into one of his own traps. It begs the question, was it meant for him? Because obviously there's the whole part of this where not only John gets put into this trap by the woman after she's freed by her like accomplice man, a child gets put into this trap, which is just horrific, and John does what he can to keep the boy safe and have the trap mostly be put on him. So basically the trap is that one or the other is getting waterboarded, and so John does whatever he can to protect the boy, and he says, don't pull that lever, I will do this. Whether or not this trap was meant for John or not, like, he takes the brunt of the waterboarding to save the boy. But obviously we know, because this movie takes place between 1 and 2, that John does survive this trap. And like I said, it's unclear. I've heard people say that he was meant to go into that trap as like a distraction or something, or to make it feel like this doctor woman won against him. And then I've heard other people say it wasn't meant for him, it was always meant for her. But then because John Kramer is just a brilliant man, he had the radiation room set up as like kind of like a fallback in case this did play out the way that the movie obviously played out. So like I said, John and this little boy get put into this waterboarding trap, and this is a whole other thing with Amanda that I really liked seeing, because she's very obviously very committed to being John Kramer's apprentice. We got to see just her devotion to him and just like how much she really like admires him and basically sees him as like a father figure to herself. We really got to see that dynamic in this movie, which I really, really liked. During the waterboarding scene, she's obviously very, very upset because, like I said, she sees John as like a father figure to herself, and to see him getting put through all of this is just really hard on her. John survives the waterboarding trap. Obviously, the little boy survives, and the two characters, the woman doctor who's the head of all the scamming, and then her partner that we thought was just another patient, but it was actually her partner in disguise. That was apparently a twist, which I kind of called, but the real twist is that he already knew. John already knew all of this. He's brilliant. He knew what was going on the whole entire time, and he locks them in a room. And I don't know exactly what it is, but I think it's radiation gets pumped into the room, and so they start getting radiation burns all over their bodies. And there's one window that is small enough for one of their heads to fit through, for them to breathe in regular fresh air, opposed to the air with all the toxins and radiation in it. So obviously these two fight for that, and she ends up winning and gets her head through the window. But then John leaves with the boy and with Amanda, and we don't really know what happens to her. But I kind of feel like even after the radiation goes away, she's going to be locked in that room. And like, what is she gonna do after that? Even though her head was out the window, the rest of her body was still in that room, so she's going to be completely covered in like radiation burn. She may not have died like a painful death like her accomplice, in the sense that he was breathing in these toxins and stuff, but she's still probably gonna die. She got what she deserved. And then obviously there's the after credit scene, which it was funny because the lights came on and pretty much everyone stood up, including Sam and my brother-in-law, and I was like, no, there's actually an after credit scene. And they're like, oh my god, really? Because no other Saw movie has an after credit scene. And the after credit scene goes back to another character we met at the beginning of the movie, who was mentioned at the beginning of the movie, and it was like, was he part of this scam the whole time? But he was never ever brought up again. So now this character is back, and not only was he back, but Detective Mark Hoffman was back. And he's the one who found him and brought him to John. And although I have my feelings about Mark Hoffman, and he's not my favorite character at all in the Saw franchise, he had probably one of the greatest lines in this movie, and I was very happy with his last line of this movie and the ending of this movie. That was Saw X. I went way more in detail than I usually do in my reviews and stuff, but I just loved this movie. I'm so excited that we saw it so late so that I can hopefully get it on DVD really soon and rewatch it, because I just loved it. I thought it was so good. I thought they did such an incredible job, and they just like honored John Kramer, and Tobin Bell was incredible as always in this movie. I just absolutely loved it. I gave it a 9 out of 10. I don't think any of the Saw movies are perfect. They all have flaws, but this movie was probably my favorite, if not just under Saw 1. I have to watch Saw 1 and Saw 2. Those two are my favorites, but I have to rewatch them to see. But this movie was just so good, and I loved it so much. I can't wait for it to come out on DVD and buy it. That is going to be it for now. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, I would love it if you would like and subscribe. I post new videos every single Friday, and I'd love to have you here. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you later. Bye, everybody.